Tonight I'll tell you 7 stories, 7 experiments that crossed every line of morality and sanity, from resurrection to poison, from secret military tests to cannibalism. Each one was meant to push the limits of knowledge, but what they revealed was something much darker. So sit back, turn off the lights, and listen closely, because these are the 7 real experiments that went too far. Part 1. The Resurrection Experiment. In 1932, there was a brilliant doctor named Robert Cornish. He was known as a prodigy, a man who graduated with a PhD when he was only 22 years old. But behind his success lay an obsession that bordered on madness. He wanted to bring the dead back to life. Robert designed a peculiar machine, something that looked like a seesaw. He would place a human corpse on top, inject it with a special chemical mixture that thinned the blood, then pump oxygen into the body and rock the seesaw back and forth, trying to make the blood circulate again. He believed that if the body could be oxygenated fast enough, there might be a small chance that the spark of life could return. He worked tirelessly. One body after another, but none of them came back. No heartbeat, no breath, no twitch. So Robert turned his attention elsewhere, to dogs. He brought home 5 dogs to test his idea. He tried the same process, the injections, the oxygen, the rocking motion, and after countless failures, 2 of the dogs began to move. Their hearts started beating weakly, their lungs gasped for air. Robert had done it, he had revived them, but the victory was hollow. Both dogs were blind, disoriented, and unable to respond to anything. They lived only for a short time before dying again. Still, that partial success fed his obsession. If it worked on dogs, could it work on humans? Robert began searching for a human body that had just died, someone recently deceased, whose organs hadn't yet decayed. He needed a person who had been alive only minutes ago. Then in 1945 something happened. A young girl named Tora Jamelin disappeared after school. She was later found to have been murdered, and the man responsible, Thomas, her killer, was sentenced to death by gas chamber. Right before the execution, Robert saw an opportunity. He reached out to the authorities and made a shocking request. He wanted to take Thomas's body immediately after his execution, to use it in his resurrection experiment. But this request raised a disturbing question. If Thomas were successfully revived, what would happen next? By law, he had already been executed. Would he be a free man? Could the government kill him twice? The answer was no. The police refused to release the body. Robert never got his chance. After that, his experiment slowed and eventually stopped. The dream that once consumed him faded away. He spent the rest of his life haunted by the question, what if it had worked? Years later, a film called Life Returns was released, inspired by his work and starring Robert himself as the doctor. He played the role of a man desperate to bring the dead back to life, a role that wasn't fiction at all, but a reflection of his own truth, and so ended one of the strangest chapters in medical history, the man who tried to resurrect the dead and almost succeeded. Part 2. The Vipeholm Experiment. In 1945, in the quiet city of Lund, Sweden, there was a hospital called Vipeholm Hospital, a place that didn't treat broken bones or flu patients, but rather people who were mentally disabled or severely ill. Most of the patients there had what doctors called intellectual disabilities. Their minds worked differently. They couldn't think, reason, or make decisions the way ordinary people could. Many couldn't even fully understand what was happening to them, and that's exactly why researchers chose them. One day, a group of scientists arrived at Vipeholm. They said they were there to study nutrition and dental health, but what they were really doing was something far more disturbing. They selected 1660 patients as subjects for an experiment. Between meals, these patients were fed chocolates, caramels, and sticky candy. Not just as treats, this was every single day for months. The candy wasn't part of any medical plan. It was the experiment. The researchers wanted to prove what caused tooth decay, and they believed that sugar was the main culprit. So they gave these patients massive amounts of sugar every day, without ever asking for consent. Over time, the patient's teeth began to rot. At first, it was just small cavities. Then entire teeth began breaking apart. Some patients lost their entire set of teeth, their gums swollen, bleeding, filled with infection. By the end of the study, 50 of the patients had mouths completely destroyed by decay, all because of what the scientists had fed them. The results were clear. Sugar feeds bacteria in the mouth, bacteria produce acid, and acid eats away at the enamel until the teeth are gone. The researchers had their answer. They proved that sugar causes cavities, but the price was horrifying. These were not volunteers. They never agreed to be part of a study. They were patients with mental disabilities, people who trusted the doctors to care for them, not harm them. And the worst part? The experiment was funded by candy companies, hoping to prove that sweets were harmless. But when the results turned against them, the companies tried to suppress the findings. Arguments broke out, threats were made, but eventually the truth got out. The Vipeholm Experiment became one of the most infamous studies in medical ethics. Yes, it proved the cause of tooth decay, but it also exposed just how cruel science can be when human rights are ignored. In the years that followed, Sweden banned human testing without consent. The country called what happened at Vipeholm a stain on its medical history, a lesson written in sugar, pain, and silence. Part 3. The Sea Spray Experiment. In the early 1950s, the city of San Francisco seemed peaceful, bright, modern, and full of life. But behind the fog rolling in from the bay, something invisible was happening. Something no one in the city would ever have believed. It started with an old man named Edward Nevin. He had just undergone surgery, was weak but recovering well. Then suddenly he fell violently ill. Fever, chills, organ failure. Within days he was dead. Doctors were baffled. When they examined his body, they found a strange bacterium, Serratia marcescens, a species almost never seen in the area. Soon, 10 more people in the city became sick with the same infection. Most survived, but no one understood where it came from. Then, as suddenly as it began, the outbreak stopped. The truth would not surface until decades later. And when it did, it shocked the entire nation. During World War II, the United States had been caught off guard at Pearl Harbor. In the years that followed, fear consumed the government. Fear that an enemy could attack not with bombs or bullets, but with germs. By the start of the Cold War, the military wanted to know how easily could a biological weapon spread through a city? How fast could bacteria move through the air, through the streets, through people? To find out, they decided to test it, not in a lab but on their own citizens. In 1950, a U.S. Navy ship anchored just off the coast of San Francisco. From its deck, the crew released a giant cloud of bacteria into the air, watching as the wind carried it over the city. The operation was called Project Sea Spray. They used 2 types of microorganisms, Bacillus globigii, believed to be harmless, and Serratia marcescens, the same one that killed Edward Nevin. Within days, the bacteria had spread across nearly the entire city. More than 800,000 people, men, women, and children, had unknowingly inhaled the microbes. No one was warned. No one gave consent. And no one had any idea that they had become part of a military experiment. For years, the government denied it happened. But when the truth finally came out, the public was furious. Officials called it a harmless test. Yet a man was dead, and countless others had been exposed. Project Sea Spray became a dark symbol of cold, war paranoia, a reminder that sometimes the danger doesn't come from enemies overseas, but from the people sworn to protect you. Part 4. The Poison Experiments. Deep inside the Soviet Union, a secret research program was running, one that blended science with murder. Between 1921 and 1991, The Soviets built hundreds of labor camps called gulags. They were prisons for political enemies, criminals, and ordinary citizens who simply fell out of favor. Men and women were forced into hard labor, starved, beaten, and often left to die. But inside some of those camps, something even darker was taking place. A Soviet biochemist named Grigory Maranovsky was leading a series of experiments for the secret police, the NKVD, which later became the KGB. His mission was to create the perfect poison, a substance that had no taste, no smell, no color, and would kill without leaving a single trace. To test his work, he used living prisoners. After they finished eating their daily meals, guards would secretly add small doses of poison to their food. The effects were horrifying. Some victims began vomiting, trembling, unable to breathe. Others fell to the ground completely paralyzed, their eyes open but their bodies frozen. Every one of them died. Maranovsky tested every toxin he could find: ricin, cyanide, curare, digitoxin, even mustard gas, chemicals capable of killing in minutes. But none were perfect enough for him. Eventually, he created a new compound known only as C2. It met all the requirements: invisible, odorless, tasteless, and completely untraceable. When injected, C2 made the victim feel calm, almost peaceful. Then their muscles began to tighten. Within 15 minutes they were dead. To an observer, it looked like the person had simply fallen asleep. The Soviet government was impressed. They began using these poisons in covert assassinations around the world. In 1947, a bishop named Theodore Romja was attacked by a Soviet truck. He survived the crash, but while recovering in the hospital, a nurse injected him with medicine. Moments later, he was dead, poisoned with curare. In 1978, a Bulgarian journalist named Georgi Markov was standing at a bus stop in London when he felt a sharp sting in his leg. A man nearby was holding an umbrella. 4 days later, Markov was dead. Doctors discovered a tiny metal pellet inside his body, filled with ricin. And in 2018 in England, a former Russian spy named Sergei Skripal and his daughter collapsed on a park bench. They were victims of a deadly nerve agent called Novichok, a chemical weapon developed decades earlier by the Soviets. Every one of these deaths traced back to the same research, to Maranovsky's secret experiments with poisons. He proved that death could be engineered, perfected, and turned into a tool of power. The Soviets called it science. The world called it murder. Part 5. The Mental Illness Treatment Experiment. In the early 1900s, at a psychiatric hospital in Trenton, New Jersey, a doctor named Henry Cotton believed he had found the cure for insanity. He wasn't a madman, not at first. He was respected, confident, and ambitious. But his idea was horrifying. Dr. Cotton believed that mental illness wasn't caused by trauma, genetics, or the mind itself. He thought madness came from hidden infections in the body, bacteria buried deep inside the teeth, the tonsils, the intestines. His theory was simple: if you remove the infection, you remove the insanity. And so he began operating. He started small, pulling out his patients' teeth. He thought that by removing the infected teeth, their minds would heal. When that didn't work, he went deeper. He began cutting out the tonsils, then the sinuses, and when those didn't help either, he started removing pieces of the intestines. If a patient still showed signs of mental illness, he would operate again and again, until their bodies couldn't take it anymore. Many of these patients were already fragile, people suffering from schizophrenia, depression, or psychosis. They were desperate for help, but instead they became test subjects in a nightmare. Dr. Cotton proudly claimed that his surgeries had an 85% success rate. Hospitals praised him. Newspapers called him a genius. Families sent their loved ones to him for treatment. But behind the hospital doors, the truth was horrifying. Patients were dying, one after another, from infection, blood loss, or shock. Some survived but were left permanently disabled, disfigured or traumatized. Others were operated on without their consent. They had no idea what was happening until it was too late. Eventually, a psychiatrist named Phyllis Greenacre began to investigate his claims. She examined his patients, his records, his numbers, and discovered that his so-called cures were lies. Most of his patients hadn't recovered. Many had died from his procedures, but by then it was too late. Hundreds of lives had already been destroyed. When Dr. Cotton died of a heart attack years later, his cure for insanity died with him. No one ever repeated his methods again. Today, his name has become a warning, a reminder of what happens when arrogance hides behind science, and when a doctor's belief in his own genius becomes more deadly than the illness he's trying to cure. Part 6. The Syphilis Experiments. In 1932, in a small town in Alabama called Tuskegee, a group of poor black farmers were told that the government wanted to help them. Doctors said they were offering free medical care, checkups, medicine, even transportation. To men who could barely afford food, it sounded like a miracle. 600 men signed up. But what they didn't know was that they were being used as test subjects. About 400 of them were already infected with the disease, syphilis, a deadly sexually transmitted infection that slowly destroys the body. The doctors knew it, but they never told the men. Instead, they said the men had bad blood, a vague term used to describe almost any sickness. They told them they would be treated, but they never gave them the cure. Even after penicillin, the real cure for syphilis, what was discovered years later, the doctors refused to give it to them. They wanted to watch what would happen as the disease slowly ate away at their bodies. It was supposed to last 6 months. It went on for 40 years. For 4 decades, these men were lied to, manipulated, and experimented on. Their wives caught the disease. Their children were born infected. By the time the truth came out, dozens were dead and hundreds more were permanently damaged. When reporters finally exposed the truth in 1972, the public was horrified. It became known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, a story so cruel that it changed medical ethics forever. But that wasn't the only one. Just a few years later, in 1946, another experiment took place, and this time in Guatemala. American doctors deliberately infected more than 1,300 people with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid. They used soldiers, prisoners, and even women from poor communities. Some were injected directly. Others were infected through sexual contact arranged by the researchers themselves. The people didn't know. They didn't consent. They were used. Their bodies turned into living test tubes. Hundreds of them got sick. Many died. Decades later, when the U.S. government finally admitted what happened, the President of the United States had to issue a public apology. But no apology could erase what those people endured. Together, Tuskegee and Guatemala became symbols of medical betrayal, proof that even science, when stripped of humanity, can turn into something monstrous. Part 7. The Nazino Island Experiment. In 1933, the Soviet Union faced a problem. Its prisons were overflowing, filled with thieves, beggars, and ordinary citizens who had broken no laws other than being poor or homeless. The government wanted a quick solution. Their idea was simple and horrifying. They decided to take thousands of these prisoners and ship them to remote, uninhabited lands, places where they could start over, build new farming colonies, and become productive citizens. It was supposed to be a social experiment, a test to see if criminals and outcasts could create a new society from nothing. One of the chosen locations was a small, isolated island in Siberia, known as Nazino Island. In May of 1933, the Soviet government sent 6,700 prisoners there. They arrived by barge, packed so tightly they could barely move. When they stepped onto the island, they realized the truth. There was nothing. No houses. No tools, no food. Just mud, wind, and freezing air. The guards gave them sacks of flour and called it rations. But there were no ovens, no pots, no way to cook it. Desperate, the prisoners mixed the flour with river water and drank it raw. It made them violently ill. Within days, hunger turned to chaos. People fought each other for food. Some tried to escape by building rafts, but the guards shot them down as they fled. Others froze to death at night, their bodies lying stiff in the dirt. Then came the moment no one wanted to believe. When the food ran out completely, people began eating the only thing left and each other. It started with the dead. Then it spread to the living. Witnesses later told stories of women being killed and eaten, of people trading flesh for flour, of madness consuming the survivors. By the time the government finally stopped the experiment, over 4,000 people were dead. The rest were too weak to stand. The few who lived were transferred to other camps, scarred forever by what they had seen and done. The Nazino experiment had failed, not just as a test, but as a measure of humanity itself. The island became known as the Cannibal Island. It remains one of the darkest chapters in Soviet history, a place where civilization vanished in less than a month, and survival turned people into monsters. 7 experiments. 7 stories that prove one thing, that in the name of science, power, or control, humans are capable of unimaginable cruelty. And the scariest part? Every one of these stories is true. If you've made it to the end. Thank you for listening. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about these experiments? Which one disturbed you the most? Tell me your thoughts down in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and hit subscribe to join us for the next dark story that's waiting to be told.